He begged for his life, in writing, to the same country he tried to erase. The president never wrote back. Instead, on May 22, 1946, they walked him into a prison courtyard in Prague. 5,000 people were already standing there, silent, waiting. In the front row, 7 women, thin, hollow-eyed, survivors of a concentration camp called Ravensbrück K. Every one of them had lost a husband, a son, a home, because of one man's signature on one order. In 4 minutes, that man would be dead. And by the time this video ends, you'll understand why an entire nation waited years just to watch it happen, and why his own execution didn't go the way anyone expected. This is the War Files. If you're new here, stop scrolling for 1 second. We tell the parts of history that get cut out of textbooks, the parts that are too brutal, too real, too uncomfortable for the classroom. If that's what you're here for, hit subscribe right now, tap the bell, because this channel drops stories like this every week, and you do not want to miss the next one. Drop a comment the second this ends. I want to know which name shocked you the most. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because this monster wasn't born evil. He was built piece by piece, and you're about to watch it happen in real time. Karlsbad, Bohemia, January 24, 1898. A spa town so beautiful that kings vacationed there. Tsars walked its promenades. It looked like paradise. Karl Hermann Frank grew up in that paradise, and somehow none of it touched him. His father wasn't just a schoolteacher. He was a zealot, and the lesson he drilled into his son wasn't math or history. It was this: Germans were born to rule. Everyone else existed to obey. Frank didn't just hear that idea. He was raised inside it like a second skin. Then, when he was 9 years old, something happened that would quietly shape the rest of his life. And honestly, the rest of a continent's history. A rock, thrown by another kid during play. It hit him directly in the eye. For almost 10 years, doctors tried to save his vision. They failed. In 1918, they took the eye out completely, replaced it with glass. Here's what almost nobody tells you about that moment: a boy raised to believe he belonged to a master race of physical perfection, suddenly trapped in a body that had already betrayed him. Some historians believe that wound is exactly where his hunger for power was born, a desperate need to prove he was still superior in a body that said otherwise. Then came 1914, World War I. 16-year-old Frank ran to enlist. The army looked at his glass eye and rejected him on the spot. While other boys marched toward glory, Frank stayed home humiliated, watching. That rejection didn't heal, it rotted. And then in 1918, the entire empire he'd grown up in simply vanished overnight. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed. A brand new country, Czechoslovakia, rose in its place. And just like that, Frank, an ethnic German, became a minority in his own homeland, displaced, furious, looking for someone to blame. By 1919, at 21 years old, he found his answer. He joined an ultranationalist party, one that existed before Hitler's own Nazi party. He didn't drift into extremism. He sprinted toward it. By 1925, he was running a bookstore that sold nothing but Nazi propaganda. Not a hobby, not a side project. This was his entire identity, built one pamphlet at a time. And it was about to get a lot more dangerous. 1933, Adolf Hitler seizes power in Germany. Within months, his eyes land on one region, the Sudetenland, the German-speaking border of Czechoslovakia, where Frank and nearly 3 million ethnic Germans lived. But here's what most people get wrong about this moment. It was never really about ethnicity. It was strategy. That border region held Czechoslovakia's entire military defense line. The mountains, the fortresses, the one thing standing between Hitler and total invasion. September 1938, Hitler issues an ultimatum: hand it over or face war. Britain and France folded instantly. In Munich, Chamberlain and the French premier sat down with Hitler and Mussolini and signed away an entire country's territory, without a single Czechoslovak representative in the room. Read that again. The nation being carved up wasn't even invited to its own dismemberment. Chamberlain flew home waving a piece of paper, calling it "Peace for Our Time." The Czech foreign minister said it best: they'd been sacrificed without so much as being asked. For Frank, this was everything he'd waited 20 years for. He was named deputy regional Nazi leader of the newly seized Sudetenland. On November 1, 1938, he joined the Nazi Party and the SS on the very same day. 20 years of resentment, finally converted into real power. It would never be enough, and for men like him, March 15, 1939, 6 months after Munich, Hitler tears up his own peace deal and sends troops into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Prague falls without a single shot fired. Hitler himself sleeps that night inside Prague Castle, the ancient seat of Czech kings, looking out over a nation he'd just swallowed whole. The Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia is born. Frank is named Secretary of State. But the real title, the one that actually mattered, was this higher SS and police leader. That put the Gestapo, the secret police, the interrogators, the entire machinery of terror, directly under his control. The persecution started within hours, not weeks. Hours. More than 118,000 Jewish residents stripped of their rights overnight. Bank accounts frozen. Businesses seized. Homes taken without a single cent paid back. Historians estimate the total theft at roughly $500 million, over $11 billion in today's money. These weren't numbers on a page. These were doctors, teachers, shop owners, musicians, families that had lived in these towns for generations. Within months, trains were already moving many of them east, toward places most of them would never leave. Even the first Reich protector, a career Nazi diplomat, occasionally tried to slow Frank down. Let that sink in. A Nazi official thought Frank was too extreme, so Hitler sent someone who would make Frank look tame by comparison. He sent Reinhard Heydrich. And this is where the story turns into something even darker. Heydrich arrived in Prague at 37 years old, tall, athletic, charming enough at dinner parties to make people forget what he actually was. American journalist William Scherer called him the most dangerous man in the entire Third Reich. Hitler himself called him the man with the iron heart. Just months earlier, Heydrich had chaired the Wannsee Conference, the meeting where Nazi officials formally coordinated the murder of every Jewish person on the continent. His first recorded words on arriving in Prague, they would Germanize the Czech vermin. Frank and Heydrich clashed at first. Two men equally hungry for power rarely share it quietly, but they recognized something in each other, a willingness to go further than anyone else dared. That recognition built one of the deadliest partnerships of the entire war. Deportations accelerated immediately. By November 1941, 5,000 Jewish men, women, and children were sent from the protectorate to a ghetto in occupied Poland. Of those 5,000 human beings, only 277 survived the war. That same year, Heydrich opened the Terezin ghetto, marketed to the world as a model Jewish settlement. In 1944, the Nazis spent weeks beautifying it before letting the Red Cross inspect it. It was theater, a lie with a fresh coat of paint. Terezin was a transit stop. Most people who passed through it ended up at Auschwitz. And Heydrich's own internal reports, written by his own hand, logged thousands of arrests and hundreds of executions in just 4 months. Numbers the Nazis themselves put on paper, which means the real total was almost certainly worse. But something was coming for Heydrich. Something that would trigger the single darkest chapter of Frank's entire life. And you need to hear exactly how close it came to failing. May 27, 1942. A sharp curve on a road outside Prague. Two men in position. Josef Gabčák, a Slovak soldier, Jan Kubík, a Czech paratrooper, both trained by British intelligence, both dropped into occupied territory for one single mission: kill Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich's open-top Mercedes slows for the curve. Gabčák steps into the road, raises his weapon. It jams completely. In the single most critical second of the entire operation, the gun fails. And here's the twist almost nobody expects. Heydrich makes the fatal mistake himself. Instead of ordering his driver to floor it, he stands up, draws his own pistol, exposes himself completely. Kubík throws a modified grenade. It explodes against the car. Shrapnel tears into Heydrich's body. He survives the blast. For days doctors think he'll recover. On June 3rd, he even sits up and eats lunch. Hours later, he collapses. On June 4th, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich dies of blood poisoning. Hitler is reportedly speechless with rage, and Karl Hermann Frank has already started planning his revenge, before Heydrich's body is even cold. What happens next is the reason Frank's name still makes people in the Czech Republic go quiet. Within hours of the attack, Frank declares a state of emergency, imposes a citywide curfew, announces that anyone helping the assassins will be executed, along with their entire families. 21,000 soldiers sweep Prague. 36,000 homes are searched. By June 4th, 157 people are already dead. The assassins are still free. On June 9th, the day of Heydrich's funeral in Berlin, Frank relays a direct order from Hitler himself. A love letter found during the manhunt contains a connection to a small village called Lidice. The connection is paper-thin, almost fabricated. It doesn't matter. The target has already been chosen. The order: shoot every man and boy. Send every woman to a concentration camp. Take the children, the ones judged racially valuable, go to German families. The rest are eliminated. Then burn the entire village to the ground. Bulldoze it flat. Erase it completely. On the night of June 9th, German forces surround Lidice. 192 men and boys are shot and dumped into a mass grave. 184 women are shipped to Ravensbrück, CK. The same camp where the 7 women in that prison courtyard would later come from. The children are torn away from their mothers. 88 of them are later murdered in gas vans at a camp called Chemno. 4 pregnant women are forced to undergo abortions in the very same hospital where Heydrich had just died days earlier. Then the village burns. Bulldozers flatten what's left. Nazi engineers even reroute the stream that once ran through the town, so water would no longer flow where a Czech village used to stand. Karl Hermann Frank personally drives out the next morning to inspect it. Witnesses said he looked satisfied. 2 weeks later, a second village, Legkai, is destroyed the exact same way. All 33 adults shot. Every child taken. Across both massacres, more than 300 men, women, and children murdered. for a crime almost none of them had anything to do with. The Czech people had a name for him after that. Bloody Dog Frank. It was the kindest thing anyone ever called him again. April 1945. The Reich is collapsing on every front. Frank makes his final calculated move, fleeing west, straight into American hands instead of Soviet ones. He understood exactly what Soviet soldiers would do to the man responsible for Lidice. On May 9, 1945, U.S. troops capture him near Plzeň. His escape plan collapses the moment Czechoslovakia demands his extradition. From March to May 1946, Frank stands trial in Prague. No lawyer in the entire city will touch the case. Every single one refuses, until one man, Kamil Ressler, finally agrees. The public never forgives him for it. They brand him the devil's advocate for the rest of his life. Ressler defends Frank anyway, with full professional integrity, under the weight of an entire nation's hatred. And Frank's defense, exactly what you'd expect from a coward. He was following orders. He was only partly responsible. Just one small gear in a much bigger machine. At one point, he actually admits the executions could be called murder by ordinary human standards, and then, in the very next breath, denies personal responsibility. The court doesn't need long to decide. May 23, 1946. Sentence of death by public hanging. Frank sends a desperate telegram to Czechoslovak President Edvard Beneš, the leader of the very country he tried to destroy, begging for mercy. Beneš never replies. May 26, 1946, 1:37 p.m. Pankow prison Prague. 5,000 people watching. 7 women from Lidice sitting in the front row. Frank is led out. His final words: Germany must live, even if we die. Long live the German nation. Long live the German spirit. He's hoisted. Dropped, left hanging. Executions like his usually last 30 minutes before the body is cut down. Frank stays on the rope for 45. Nobody rushes to end it early. He's buried in an unmarked grave at a Blythe cemetery, the exact same ground where Jan Kuby and Joseph Gabdiak, the 2 men who killed Heydrich, had secretly been buried years before. The hunter sharing eternity with the men he hunted. His wife spends 10 years in a Soviet gulag in Kazakhstan. When she's finally released in 1955, she spends 4 more years searching West Germany for her 3 children. Children who had been raised under new names in new families, with no memory of who they used to be. Lidice was rebuilt after the war. Today it stands as a memorial and a museum. Villages across Mexico, the United States, Brazil, and Europe rename themselves Lidice in solidarity. A quiet, permanent refusal to let the erasure Frank engineered actually succeed. He spent his whole life believing ideology justified atrocity. That power excused anything. That some lives simply counted for less than others. 5,000 people watched him hang. 7 women from Lidice sat in the front row. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Justice arrived. 45 minutes late to cut the rope down, but it arrived. If this story hit as hard for you as it did for us putting it together, hit subscribe right now, tap that bell, and drop one word in the comments. The name that shocked you the most. We're bringing you the next war criminals story soon, and trust me, it's worse than this one.